The blizzard that roared down from the mountains on the 15th of November in 1877 buried the small town of Pueblo, Colorado, beneath 3 feet of snow in a single night. And Eleanor Langford knew with certainty that she would die here among strangers if someone did not open their door. Her fingers had lost all feeling an hour ago, and her legs moved mechanically through the drifts, each step requiring a monumental effort of will. She had been traveling west to meet her cousin in California when the stagecoach driver, sensing the approaching storm, had stopped in Pueblo to wait it out. But Eleanor, impatient and foolish, had taken a walk to stretch her legs before the weather turned, wandering farther than intended. When the snow began falling in earnest, she had become disoriented in the white chaos, unable to find her way back to the boarding house. Now darkness was falling, and the wind howled like a living thing, tearing at her cloak and skirts. Her vision blurred as ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. Through the swirling white, she could barely make out the shape of a building ahead. She stumbled toward it, praying it was not a mirage conjured by her freezing mind. Eleanor collapsed against the wooden door, her numb hands unable to form a proper knock. Instead, she slumped there, using the last of her strength to push her body against the wood, hoping the impact would alert someone inside. The door opened suddenly, and she fell forward into warmth and lamplight. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. "Good God," a man's voice said, rough with surprise. "Where did you come from?" Eleanor could not answer. Her teeth chattered so violently she feared they might shatter. The man lifted her easily, carrying her deeper into what appeared to be a small cabin. She caught a glimpse of his face in the firelight, angular and weathered, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and eyes that reflected genuine concern. "Can you hear me?" he asked, setting her in a chair near the fireplace. "Miss, can you understand what I am saying?" She managed a small nod, though her body shook uncontrollably. "I need to get these wet clothes off you or you will lose your fingers and toes to frostbite," he said, his tone matter of fact but not unkind. "Do you have anyone with you? Anyone who will be looking for you?" "The boarding house," Eleanor managed through her chattering teeth. "Could not find it." The man moved quickly, pulling a heavy quilt from a trunk in the corner. "I am going to turn my back," he said. "You need to remove those wet things and wrap yourself in this. Can you manage that?" Eleanor's fingers were so stiff she could barely grip the fabric of her dress, but she nodded anyway. Pride would not save her from freezing to death. The man turned toward the wall, giving her privacy. Eleanor struggled with the buttons of her dress, her movements clumsy and slow. After what felt like an eternity, she managed to peel away the sodden layers, her undergarments clinging to her like a second skin of ice. She wrapped the quilt around herself, grateful for its thick warmth. "All right," she whispered. The man turned back, keeping his eyes respectfully on her face. He moved to the stove in the corner and began preparing something. "My name is Franklin Porter," he said. "I work as a ranch hand for the Sutherland spread about 5 miles north of town. I keep this cabin for when I need to come into Pueblo for supplies or when the weather is too rough for the ride back." "Eleanor Langford," she replied, her voice growing stronger as warmth began to seep back into her body. "I was traveling to California." Franklin brought her a tin cup filled with hot coffee. "Drink this slowly," he instructed. "Not too fast or you will make yourself sick." The coffee was bitter and strong, but it was the most wonderful thing Eleanor had ever tasted. She sipped it carefully, feeling the heat spread through her chest and belly. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury. Snow pelted against the windows like thrown sand. Franklin walked to the door and opened it a crack, peering out into the darkness. When he closed it again, his expression was grim. "This is a bad one," he said. Worst I have seen in years. I cannot take you back to the boarding house tonight. The visibility is nothing, and we would both freeze before we made it 2 blocks. Eleanor nodded, understanding but feeling a flutter of anxiety. She was alone in a cabin with a strange man, wearing nothing but a quilt. Her reputation would be ruined if anyone found out. Not that reputation mattered much when one was facing death by freezing. I have a bed in the corner, Franklin continued, as if reading her thoughts. You will sleep there. I will make do with the chair by the fire. In the morning, when the storm breaks, I will take you back to town. Thank you, Eleanor said, meaning it with her whole heart. You saved my life. Franklin shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But Eleanor knew that was not true. She had passed other buildings in her desperate search for shelter, had pounded on other doors that remained closed. Franklin Porter had opened his door to a stranger in a blizzard, and that said something about the kind of man he was. As the night deepened, Franklin prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Eleanor's clothes hung near the fire to dry, steaming in the heat. They ate in companionable silence, the storm raging outside creating an odd intimacy in the small cabin. "What takes you to California?" Franklin asked eventually. "My cousin has a dress shop in San Francisco," Eleanor explained. "She wrote to me after my father died last year, offering me a place to stay and work. There was nothing left for me in Philadelphia. My mother passed when I was young, and I have no siblings. It seemed like a good opportunity for a fresh start." "That is a long journey for a woman alone," Franklin observed. Eleanor bristled slightly at the implication. "I am 22 years old and perfectly capable of managing myself, or at least I was until I got lost in a blizzard." A hint of a smile crossed Franklin's face. "I meant no offense." "It is brave, is what I meant to say." "Brave and admirable." Mollified, Eleanor relaxed. "What about you? Have you always worked with cattle?" Franklin nodded. "Born and raised in Colorado. My father had a small ranch east of here, but he lost it during the Panic of '73. I have been working for other people ever since, saving what I can with the hope of buying my own land someday." "Do you like the work?" Eleanor asked. "I like being outside, working with my hands," Franklin said thoughtfully. "I like the honesty of it. A cow does not lie or cheat or put on airs. It either lives or dies based on how well you care for it. There is something satisfying in that." They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing more easily than Eleanor would have expected with a stranger. Franklin told her about life on the ranch, the hard winters and scorching summers, the satisfaction of a successful calving season, and the heartbreak of losing stock to disease or predators. Eleanor shared stories of Philadelphia, of the crowded streets and tall buildings, the society parties that had bored her to tears and the books that had been her only real companions. When Eleanor's eyes began to droop with exhaustion, Franklin insisted she take the bed. He gave her one of his shirts to sleep in, turning his back while she changed out of the quilt. The bed was narrow but comfortable, the blankets heavy and warm. Eleanor fell asleep to the sound of the storm and the crackling fire, feeling safer than she had in months. She woke to pale morning light filtering through the frosted windows. The storm had not abated. If anything, it seemed stronger, the wind screaming around the cabin's corners with a sound like tortured souls. Franklin was already awake, stoking the fire. He glanced over when he heard her stirring. "Morning. I'm afraid we are snowed in good and proper. I opened the door to check, and the drift is up past my waist. Even if we could dig out, I would not want to try making it to the boarding house in this weather." Eleanor sat up, clutching the blankets to her chest. She was still wearing Franklin's shirt, and her own clothes, while dry now, were not suitable for a blizzard. "How long do you think the storm will last?" Franklin shook his head. No way to tell. Could be hours, could be days. These mountain storms are unpredictable. Days. Eleanor's heart sank. She thought of her trunk at the boarding house, her traveling money sewn into the lining of her good coat. She thought of her cousin expecting her in California, of the stagecoach that would surely leave without her once the weather cleared. "I can see you worrying," Franklin said gently. "Do not. We have enough food for a week if we are careful, plenty of firewood, and this cabin is solid. We will be all right." Over the next hours, they fell into an easy routine. Franklin prepared meals while Eleanor tidied the small space, folding blankets and organizing supplies. They talked to pass the time, sharing more stories of their lives. Eleanor learned that Franklin was 27, that his mother had died giving birth to a stillborn sister when he was 15, that his father had drunk himself to death within 2 years of losing the ranch. Franklin learned that Eleanor had taught herself to read Latin and Greek from her father's books, that she had a beautiful singing voice though she was too shy to perform for others, that she had once punched a boy who pulled her braids in school. The first day passed into night, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. Eleanor slept in the bed again while Franklin dozed in his chair, though she noticed he never seemed to sleep deeply, always alert to any change in the weather or unusual sounds. The second day brought no relief. The world outside remained a howling white void. Franklin and Eleanor played cards to pass the time, using dried beans as betting tokens. Eleanor won more often than not, which seemed to amuse Franklin. "You are counting cards," he accused without heat. "I am doing no such thing," Eleanor protested, though her smile gave her away. "I simply pay attention." "That is the same thing," Franklin laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh properly, and the sound transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. On the third day, cabin fever began to set in. The space that had seemed cozy now felt cramped. Eleanor found herself pacing the length of the room, restless energy building in her limbs. "Tell me something," Franklin said, watching her pace. "Something you have never told anyone else." Eleanor paused, considering. "Sometimes I am terrified that I have made a terrible mistake," she admitted. "Leaving Philadelphia, traveling across the country to live with a cousin I barely know. What if I hate California? What if my cousin and I do not get along? What if I have thrown away everything familiar for nothing?" Franklin was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that fear and courage are not opposites. Courage is being afraid and doing the thing anyway. You are braver than you know, Eleanor Langford." Something in his voice made Eleanor look at him closely. In the firelight, his eyes were warm, his expression sincere. A flutter of something unfamiliar moved through her chest. "What about you?" she asked, sitting down across from him. "What is your secret fear?" Franklin stared into the fire. "That I will work my whole life and never have anything to show for it. That I will die as poor as my father, with nothing to leave behind, no legacy, no mark that I was here." "You saved my life," Eleanor said softly. "That is not nothing. That is everything." Their eyes met and held. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an awareness that had been building over the past days. Franklin reached out slowly, giving Eleanor plenty of time to pull away. When she did not, his work-roughened hand cupped her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Eleanor," he began, but whatever he meant to say was lost as she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, questioning. Then Franklin's other hand came up to tangle in her hair, and Eleanor's hands gripped his shoulders, and the kiss deepened into something urgent and sweet and utterly right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "I did not bring you here for this," he said. "I want you to know that. I would never take advantage." "I know," Eleanor whispered. "I know what kind of man you are, Franklin Porter." They sat together by the fire for a long time, Eleanor's head on Franklin's shoulder, his arm around her waist. Outside the storm continued its fury, but inside the cabin, everything had changed. The fourth day brought a slight lessening of the wind, though snow continued to fall steadily. Franklin and Eleanor moved around each other with a new awareness, finding excuses to touch, hands brushing as they passed dishes, shoulders pressed together as they sat by the fire. "When this storm ends," Franklin said that evening, "and I take you back to town, what then?" Eleanor had been thinking about the same question. "I suppose I will wait for the next stage coach to California." "Is that what you want?" Franklin asked carefully. "I do not know any more," Eleanor admitted. "A week ago I was certain, now everything feels different." Franklin took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I do not have much to offer you. A ranch hand's wages are not generous, and it will be years before I save enough to buy land. But I am a hard worker and I am honest, and I think I could make you happy if you gave me the chance." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I am asking you to consider it," Franklin said. "I know we have only known each other a few days, but I have never felt this way about anyone. I look at you and I see my future if you will have me." Franklin, a tremendous crack interrupted her words. The cabin shuddered and something heavy crashed against the roof. Franklin leaped to his feet, grabbing a lantern and rushing to check the damage. Eleanor followed, her heart in her throat. "A tree branch," Franklin called back. "A big one." "It hit the roof, but I do not think it broke through. I need to get up there and clear it before the weight causes real damage." "You cannot go out in this weather," Eleanor protested. "If the roof collapses, we will freeze," Franklin said grimly. He began pulling on his heaviest coat and boots. "I will be quick." Eleanor watched anxiously as Franklin forced open the door and climbed onto the roof, using a ladder he kept against the side of the cabin. The wind immediately tried to rip the door from her hands, and snow blasted into the cabin. She could barely see Franklin in the white chaos, just his dark shape against the snow as he worked to shift the heavy branch. Minutes felt like hours. Eleanor's hands ached from gripping the door frame, her eyes strained from trying to keep Franklin in sight. Then, finally, she heard the crash of the branch falling to the ground and Franklin's boots on the ladder. He stumbled back inside, covered in snow, his face red from the wind. Eleanor slammed the door shut and immediately began helping him out of his frozen coat. "Foolish man," she scolded, her hands shaking. "You could have been blown off the roof." "But I was not," Franklin said through chattering teeth. He moved close to the fire and Eleanor brought him hot coffee, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. When he finally stopped shivering, he caught her hand and pulled her down to sit beside him. "You did not answer my question, before we were interrupted." Eleanor looked at this man who had saved her life, who had shown her kindness and humor and genuine care. She thought about the unknown future waiting for her in California, and then she thought about the possibility of building a life here, with Franklin in this hard, beautiful country. "I would need to send word to my cousin," she said slowly. "It would not be right to leave her wondering what happened to me." Hope flared in Franklin's eyes. "Of course. And I would want to contribute," Eleanor continued. "I will not be a burden. I can sew, I can keep books, I can teach if there is a school that needs a teacher." "You can do whatever makes you happy," Franklin said. Eleanor smiled, feeling the rightness of her decision settle into her bones. "Then yes. Yes, I will stay. Yes to all of it." Franklin kissed her then, deep and thorough, a kiss full of promise and joy. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools. The storm finally broke on the 6th day. Franklin and Eleanor emerged from the cabin into a world transformed by snow, everything white and sparkling in the brilliant sunshine. The snow was deep enough that walking was difficult, but the sky was clear and blue, and the air had that peculiar stillness that comes after a great storm. Franklin held Eleanor's hand as they made their way through the drifts back toward the main part of town. The boarding house, when they reached it, was a hive of activity. The proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, nearly fainted when she saw Eleanor. "My dear girl, we thought you were dead," she exclaimed. "When you did not return before the storm hit, we searched as much as we could, but the weather was so terrible." "Where have you been?" Eleanor glanced at Franklin, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I was caught in the storm, and Mr. Porter was kind enough to offer shelter in his cabin. He saved my life." Mrs. Henderson's eyes went wide, clearly understanding the implications of a young, unmarried woman spending nearly a week alone with a man. Before she could say anything scandalous, Franklin spoke up. "Mrs. Henderson, I would like to speak with you and any other respectable women in town about chaperoning Miss Langford properly from now on. You see, I have asked her to marry me, and she has agreed. We will be wed as soon as it can be arranged." That set off a flurry of excitement and congratulations. Mrs. Henderson, who had a romantic heart beneath her stern exterior, immediately began planning. The wedding would be held as soon as the preacher could make it to town, which would likely be a few weeks given the state of the roads. In the meantime, Eleanor would stay at the boarding house under Mrs. Henderson's watchful eye, everything proper and respectable. The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor retrieved her trunk and was relieved to find her money intact. She used some of it to purchase fabric for a wedding dress, which she sewed herself with help from several of the local women who had taken her under their collective wing. Franklin visited daily, always with Mrs. Henderson or another woman present as propriety demanded, though they managed to steal a few moments alone here and there. Secret kisses in the hallway that left Eleanor breathless. Franklin introduced Eleanor to his employer, John Sutherland, who owned the ranch where Franklin worked. Sutherland was a gruff man in his 50s, but he had a kind heart and a deep respect for Franklin's abilities. "Best hand I have ever had," Sutherland told Eleanor. "Honest, hard-working, smart about cattle. You have chosen well, Miss Langford." Eleanor watched Franklin's face flush with pride at the compliment, and her heart swelled with affection for this good, humble man. The preacher finally arrived on a cold but clear day in early December. The wedding was held in the small church at the edge of town, with what seemed like half of Pueblo in attendance. Eleanor wore her dress of deep blue wool, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Franklin wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face as she walked down the aisle. They spoke their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through all the days of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Franklin kissed Eleanor with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. There was a celebration afterward at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Eleanor danced with Franklin, his arms strong around her waist, and thought about how strange life was, how a wrong turn in a blizzard had led her to this perfect moment. As winter deepened, Eleanor and Franklin made their home in the small cabin where they had first met. Franklin continued his work at the Sutherland Ranch, leaving before dawn and returning after dark during the busy season. Eleanor made the cabin comfortable, sewing curtains for the windows and a quilt for their bed, cooking hearty meals that Franklin devoured with genuine appreciation. It was not an easy life. Money was tight and the work was hard. But there was joy in the small things, in morning coffee shared before Franklin left for work, in evenings spent reading aloud by the fire, in the warmth of Franklin's arms at night. Eleanor found work as well, taking in sewing from the townswomen and helping Mrs. Henderson with the boarding house accounts. She had a head for numbers that Mrs. Henderson appreciated, and the extra money helped build their savings toward the dream of their own ranch. January brought more snow, and the world seemed to shrink to just the cabin and the path to town. Franklin made snowshoes so they could move more easily through the drifts. On Sundays, they walked to church together, Eleanor's arm linked through Franklin's, both of them bundled against the cold. One particularly fierce storm kept Franklin home from the ranch for 3 days. They spent the time in bed, making love and talking, learning the geography of each other's bodies and souls. Franklin told Eleanor about his dreams for the future, the ranch he wanted to build, the horses he wanted to raise. Eleanor shared her fear that she might not be able to have children, a worry she had carried since her mother's death in childbirth. "Then we will have each other," Franklin said simply. "That is enough for me, but I think you are stronger than you know, Eleanor. You are not your mother's story, you are your own." February brought a brief thaw and then more snow. Eleanor began to feel restless, cooped up by the weather. She missed the stimulation of city life, the libraries and theaters and crowds. But then Franklin would come home. His face lit up at the sight of her, and he would tell her about his day, about the new calf born that morning or the way the sunset painted the mountains pink and gold, and Eleanor would remember why she had chosen this life. In early March, as the snow finally began to melt in earnest, Franklin came home with news. John Sutherland wanted to expand his operation, and he had offered Franklin a position as foreman, with better pay and a small house on the ranch property. "The house has 2 bedrooms," Franklin said, his excitement palpable. "And a real kitchen, bigger than this whole cabin. There is a barn too, and Sutherland said I could keep a few animals of my own, start building my own herd." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, genuinely thrilled. "Franklin, that is wonderful." They moved in April when the roads were finally clear enough for a wagon. The house was small but sturdy, with glass windows and wooden floors. Eleanor scrubbed it from top to bottom and hung her curtains, arranging their few possessions to make it feel like home. Franklin thrived in his new position. He had a natural authority that the other ranch hands respected, and his knowledge of cattle management impressed even the most experienced cowboys. He worked longer hours than ever, but he seemed energized by the responsibility, coming home tired but satisfied. Eleanor befriended the other ranch families, finding a particular kinship with Sarah Mitchell, the wife of one of the senior hands. Sarah had 3 young children and a warm, maternal nature that made Eleanor feel immediately at ease. The women would gather in the afternoons to sew and talk while the children played, and Eleanor felt herself becoming part of a community in a way she never had in Philadelphia's society circles. As spring deepened into summer, Eleanor realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she tried not to hope, remembering her fears about childbirth. But as the weeks passed and her breasts became tender and her belly began to swell, the truth became undeniable. She told Franklin on a warm evening in June as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am with child," she said simply. Franklin's reaction was immediate and joyful. He swept her into his arms, laughing and spinning her around until she begged him to stop, dizzy and laughing herself. "When?" he asked, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "January, I think," Eleanor said. "Early February at the latest." Franklin's face grew serious. "Are you frightened, terrified?" Eleanor admitted, "but also happy. So happy, Franklin." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I will take care of you. Whatever you need, whatever will keep you safe and healthy, you will have it." Eleanor's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. She felt well except for some morning sickness that passed by the 4th month. Her belly grew round and firm, and she felt the first flutters of movement in August, like butterflies trapped beneath her skin. Franklin was impossibly attentive, bringing her flowers from the meadow, rubbing her sore feet in the evenings, refusing to let her lift anything heavy. It would have been suffocating if it had not been so clearly born of love. Sarah Mitchell became Eleanor's guide through the mysteries of pregnancy, offering advice and reassurance. She helped Eleanor sew tiny clothes and blankets and promised to be present for the birth along with the midwife, Mrs. Carlson, who had delivered all of Sarah's children. Autumn came, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Franklin worked to prepare for winter, stocking the woodpile high and making sure they had plenty of supplies. Eleanor nested, arranging and rearranging the small bedroom that would become the nursery, washing and folding the tiny clothes, until Franklin gently suggested that perhaps they were clean enough. The first snow fell in November, exactly a year after the blizzard that had brought Eleanor and Franklin together. They stood on the porch together, Eleanor's back against Franklin's chest, his arms wrapped around her and their unborn child, and watched the white flakes drift down from the gray sky. "A year ago I was lost and freezing and certain I was going to die," Eleanor said softly. "And now I am here with you, waiting for our baby to be born. Life is strange and wonderful, is it not?" "You are strange and wonderful," Franklin murmured, kissing the top of her head. "The best thing that ever happened to me." Labor began on a frigid morning in late January. Eleanor woke to a cramping pain that started low in her back and wrapped around to her belly. She knew immediately what it was. "Franklin," she said, shaking him awake, "it is time." Franklin leaped out of bed, immediately alert. He dressed quickly and ran to fetch Mrs. Carlson and Sarah, while Eleanor paced the bedroom, breathing through the contractions as they grew stronger and closer together. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor had not fully appreciated what her mother must have endured until she was in the midst of it herself. The pain was overwhelming, coming in waves that left her gasping and exhausted. But Mrs. Carlson was skilled and calm, and Sarah held Eleanor's hand and wiped her forehead with cool cloths. And somehow Eleanor found the strength to keep going. Franklin waited in the other room, pacing frantically. Eleanor could hear his boots on the wooden floor between her contractions, and the sound was oddly comforting, knowing he was near. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor gave one final tremendous push and felt the baby slide free. The pain receded, replaced by overwhelming relief and exhaustion. A cry filled the room, thin and outraged and absolutely beautiful. "A boy," Mrs. Carlson announced, holding up the squirming red infant. "A healthy boy." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Oh, Eleanor, he is perfect," Mrs. Carlson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor looked down at her son's tiny scrunched face, his eyes squeezed shut, his mouth open in continued protest at being thrust into the cold world, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Franklin," she called out, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Come meet your son." Franklin burst into the room, his face pale with worry that transformed into wonder when he saw Eleanor and the baby. He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid he might break something. "He is so small," Franklin whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "He is perfect," Eleanor said, "just like his father." They named him Thomas after Franklin's father, but gave him the middle name of William after Eleanor's father. Thomas William Porter, born on January 28, 1879, weighing about 7 pounds according to Mrs. Carlson's experienced assessment. The first months of Thomas's life were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Eleanor was exhausted in a way she had never experienced, but she was also filled with a fierce, protective love that surprised her with its intensity. Franklin was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried, changing his nappies without complaint, singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. As winter melted into spring, Thomas grew and thrived. He smiled for the first time in March, a toothless gummy grin that made both Eleanor and Franklin melt. By April, he was sleeping through most nights, and Eleanor began to feel human again. Franklin continued to excel as foreman. Under his management, the Sutherland Ranch prospered, with successful calving seasons and healthy cattle that brought good prices at market. In May, John Sutherland called Franklin into his office for a private conversation. Franklin came home that evening with a strange expression on his face, somewhere between shock and elation. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, concern flooding through her. "What happened?" "Sutherland is getting old," Franklin said slowly. "His sons have no interest in ranching. They both moved back east years ago, so he has decided to sell me half the ranch. He will finance it himself, taking a percentage of the profits until I pay off the debt. Eleanor, we are going to own land, real land with cattle and horses and everything." Eleanor set down the carrots she had been chopping for dinner and stared at her husband. "Franklin, that is incredible, but can we manage it?" "The debt, the responsibility, I think so," Franklin said. "I have been running the place for him anyway. This just makes it official. And Sutherland will still be around to provide guidance. He is not leaving, just stepping back. What do you think?" Eleanor thought about the life they could build, the legacy they could leave for Thomas and any other children they might have. She thought about the girl who had gotten lost in a blizzard, frightened and alone, and the woman she had become, strong and loved and ready for this new challenge. "I think we should do it," she said. So Franklin became a partner in the Sutherland Ranch, which was renamed the Sutherland Porter Ranch. The work was harder than ever, but Franklin thrived on it. Eleanor helped where she could, managing the household accounts with her usual skill and occasionally riding out to bring Franklin lunch in the far pastures, baby Thomas secured in a sling against her chest. The ranch prospered. Franklin proved to be as good a businessman as he was a cattleman, negotiating fair prices and making smart decisions about which stock to sell and which to keep for breeding. Eleanor used her education to keep meticulous records, tracking expenses and profits in neat columns that made it easy to see how the ranch was performing. Thomas grew into a lively toddler, running around the ranch yard and making friends with the ranch dogs. He adored his father, following Franklin everywhere when he was home, imitating the way he walked and talked. Franklin was endlessly patient with his son, teaching him the names of the animals and letting him help with simple chores. In the spring of 1881, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in December, a month before Thomas's 3rd birthday. They named her Alice Marie Porter, and she had Eleanor's dark hair and Franklin's gray eyes. Life fell into a happy rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper, and Franklin gradually paid down the debt to Sutherland. Thomas started school in town, riding in with Franklin each morning and studying his letters in the evenings with Eleanor's help. Alice grew into a bright, curious child, always asking questions and exploring everything she could reach. In 1883, John Sutherland passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. He left his remaining share of the ranch to Franklin in his will, making Franklin the sole owner. It was a bittersweet moment. Grief at the loss of a mentor and friend mixed with gratitude for the incredible gift Sutherland had given them. Franklin stood at Sutherland's grave with his hat in his hands, Eleanor beside him, and made a silent promise to honor the man's legacy by taking care of the land and the people who depended on the ranch for their livelihoods. The years passed, each one bringing new challenges and joys. There were droughts that tested their endurance, winters that seemed endless, disease that swept through the herd and had to be carefully managed. But there were also good years, abundant years, when the grass grew thick and the cattle were fat, and the profits allowed them to expand the ranch and improve the house. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Alice was more adventurous, always getting into mischief and coming home with scraped knees and wild stories. In 1885, Eleanor gave birth to another son, Henry James Porter, who proved to be the most easygoing of their children, content to sit and observe the world with calm, watchful eyes. Franklin's hair began to gray at the temples, and Eleanor noticed fine lines around his eyes and mouth, marks of years spent squinting into the sun and laughing at their children's antics. She loved these signs of their life together, each one a testament to the years they had shared. On a November evening in 1887, 10 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Eleanor and Franklin sat on their porch after the children were in bed, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The first snow of the season was starting to fall, fat flakes drifting down in the lamplight. "Do you ever regret it?" Franklin asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going to California, you could have had an easier life working in your cousin's dress shop." Eleanor looked at her husband, at the face she knew better than her own, at the hands that had held hers through births and deaths, and every ordinary day in between. She thought about the ranch, about the home they had built together, about their children sleeping safely inside. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This is exactly where I am meant to be." Franklin pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall just as they had a year after they met. The world around them was white and quiet and peaceful, and Eleanor thought about how that long-ago blizzard had seemed like a disaster, but had actually been the beginning of everything good in her life. Thomas finished school in 1890 and immediately began working the ranch full-time alongside his father. He had Franklin's natural way with cattle and Eleanor's head for business, a combination that promised well for the ranch's future. Alice, at 9, was still declaring she would never marry and would instead become a doctor, a declaration that made Eleanor hide a smile while Franklin looked vaguely terrified. Henry, at 5, was happy to tag along with whoever would let him, content with his lot in life. In 1892, Eleanor's cousin Martha finally made the journey from San Francisco to visit. She arrived in a fashionable traveling suit, stepping off the train with a look of bemusement at the frontier town Pueblo had remained despite the encroachment of civilization. Martha stayed for 2 weeks, and while she was polite about the ranch and Eleanor's life, it was clear that she could not understand why anyone would choose this existence over the sophistication of city life. On her last evening, as they sat in Eleanor's comfortable parlor, Martha finally spoke her mind. "I will never understand why you stayed," she said. "You could have had culture, education, society. Instead, you are stuck on a ranch in the middle of nowhere." Eleanor looked around her home, at the books lining the shelves that she and Franklin read together, at the paintings Alice had made hanging on the walls, at the photographs of her family arranged on the mantel. Through the window, she could see Franklin and Thomas working with the horses in the corral, their movements synchronized from years of working together. "I am not stuck," Eleanor said gently. I chose this life and I would choose it again every single day. I have love, Martha. Real, deep, abiding love. I have children who make me laugh and sometimes make me want to tear my hair out. I have work that matters, a home that is truly mine, a partner who sees me as an equal. What more could anyone want? Martha shook her head, clearly not convinced, but she did not argue further. When she left the next day, Eleanor felt no regret at seeing her go. They were too different now, their lives having taken such divergent paths that they barely spoke the same language anymore. Life continued its steady march forward. In 1894, a young woman named Catherine came to teach at the school in town. Thomas, now 16, was immediately smitten. Eleanor watched her son fall in love with a mixture of amusement and nostalgia, remembering her own swift certainty about Franklin all those years ago. Thomas and Catherine married in 1896, when he was 18 and she was 19. It was a beautiful summer wedding, held right there on the ranch. As Eleanor watched her son pledge his life to this bright, kind young woman, she felt Franklin's hand slip into hers. She squeezed it, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built together. Thomas and Catherine made their home on the ranch, moving into a small house that Franklin and Thomas had built together. In 1897, Eleanor became a grandmother when Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. Holding that tiny baby, looking into her granddaughter's face, Eleanor felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both humbling and joyful. Alice, true to her stubborn nature, left for medical school in Denver when she was 18 in 1898. It was difficult to let her go, but Eleanor was proud of her daughter's determination to forge her own path. Alice wrote long letters home, filling them with descriptions of her studies and the fascinating cases she observed. Franklin worried constantly, but Eleanor had faith in their daughter's strength and intelligence. Henry, gentler and more artistic than his siblings, showed an interest in architecture and design. He spent hours sketching buildings and bridges, his talent clear even to Eleanor's untrained eye. Franklin encouraged this interest, even though it meant Henry might not stay on the ranch long term. Both Eleanor and Franklin had learned that loving their children meant supporting their dreams, even when those dreams took them away. The new century arrived with celebration and optimism. On January 1, 1900, Eleanor and Franklin stood on their porch with Thomas and Catherine. Baby Rose bundled against the cold and watched fireworks that someone in town had set off to mark the occasion. A new century, Franklin mused. Hard to believe. Eleanor leaned against him, this man who had saved her life and given her everything worth having. They were both in their 40s now, no longer young but not yet old, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and hard winters, but still strong, still capable. "What do you think the new century will bring?" Catherine asked. "More of the same, I hope," Eleanor said. "More love, more family, more of this life we have built together." Franklin kissed the top of her head. "I will drink to that." The years of the new century brought changes, as years always do. Alice finished medical school in 1903 and shocked everyone by returning to Pueblo to open a practice, declaring that frontier towns needed doctors just as much as cities did. She met and married a lawyer named Daniel Wright in 1904, a man intelligent enough to appreciate her abilities and secure enough to support her career. Henry left for school in Chicago in 1905, studying architecture with a passion that reminded Eleanor of her own hunger for knowledge as a young woman. He wrote often, his letters filled with sketches and ideas, and Eleanor treasured each one. Thomas took over more of the daily running of the ranch as Franklin's joints began to ache more with each winter. Franklin was not ready to retire, not by any means, but he was content to let his son shoulder more of the burden. Thomas proved to be as capable as Franklin had always been, and under his management, the ranch continued to thrive. More grandchildren arrived. Catherine gave birth to a son in 1902, another daughter in 1904. Alice and Daniel had twins in 1906, a boy and a girl who kept their mother running ragged between her medical practice and motherhood. Eleanor helped where she could, delighting in her role as grandmother, spoiling the children in ways she had never spoiled her own. In 1907, on a crisp autumn day, Eleanor was working in her garden when she felt a strange tightness in her chest. She sat down on the bench Franklin had built for her years ago, waiting for the feeling to pass. It did eventually, but it left her shaken and more tired than she had been in years. She did not tell Franklin about the incident, not wanting to worry him, but over the following weeks it happened again and again. Finally, Alice noticed her mother's pallor during a Sunday dinner and insisted on examining her. "Your heart," Alice said after listening with her stethoscope. "Mother, your heart is not beating as strongly as it should. You need to rest more, take things easy." "I am fine," Eleanor protested, but Alice was not having it. Franklin, once he learned what was happening, became impossibly overprotective. He insisted Eleanor stop working in the garden, stop helping with the heavy housework, stop doing anything more strenuous than reading. Eleanor chafed under these restrictions, but she could not deny that she was tired in a way that rest did not seem to fix. The winter of 1907 was mild, thank goodness, but Eleanor felt every one of her 52 years. She spent more time sitting by the fire, watching the world through her window, Franklin always nearby, his concern a palpable presence. Spring came, and with it a renewal of energy. Eleanor felt better, stronger, and insisted on planting her garden despite Franklin's protests. They compromised, with Franklin doing the heavy digging while Eleanor directed and planted the seeds. On a warm May evening, Eleanor and Franklin walked slowly around the ranch, admiring the new calves and the green grass and the mountains still capped with snow. They walked hand in hand as they had done 1,000 times before, but this time Eleanor was struck by how precious it all was, how fleeting. "I want you to know," she said, stopping to face Franklin, "that I have been happy. Happier than I ever imagined I could be. You gave me that, Franklin. You and this life we built together." Franklin's eyes filled with tears, which he blinked away impatiently. "Do not talk like that. You are going to be fine. Alice said if you rest and take care of yourself. I am not planning on going anywhere just yet," Eleanor interrupted with a smile. "I am just saying that if something did happen, I want you to know that I have no regrets. None at all. You were the best choice I ever made." Franklin pulled her close, holding her with a gentleness that spoke of his fear of breaking her. "You were lost in a blizzard and I found you. Best day of my life." "I found you too," Eleanor whispered. "We found each other." They stood there in the fading light, two people who had built a life from nothing but love and determination, and Eleanor felt at peace in a way that transcended her failing body. The years continued to pass, and Eleanor's health, while never robust, remained stable. She learned to pace herself, to rest when she needed to let others help her in ways she once would have resisted. Franklin rarely left her side when he was not working, and even then, he had Thomas bring him home for lunch each day just so he could check on her. Henry returned from Chicago in 1910 with a degree and a fiancée, a sweet girl named Elizabeth who was studying to be a teacher. They married that summer in another beautiful ranch wedding, and Henry surprised everyone by announcing that he planned to stay in Colorado, opening an architecture practice in Denver, but visiting the ranch often. Eleanor's grandchildren grew, and she delighted in each one, telling them stories of the old days, of the blizzard that had brought their grandfather into her life, of the early years when the ranch was just a dream. The children loved these stories, begging for them again and again, and Eleanor never tired of telling them. In 1912, on a cold November night, Eleanor and Franklin sat together in the parlor, the same room where they had spent countless evenings over the past 35 years. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and snow fell gently outside, visible in the lamplight. 35 years, Eleanor said softly. 35 years since that blizzard. Franklin reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his 61 years. Feels like yesterday and like forever ago all at the same time. Do you remember how frightened I was? Eleanor asked. I thought I was going to die in that storm. And instead you found me, Franklin said with a smile. We found each other, Eleanor corrected, as she always did. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of companionship. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white, and Eleanor thought about how that first blizzard had seemed like an ending but had actually been a beginning. Her children were grown and happy, her grandchildren thriving. The ranch was prosperous, a testament to Franklin's hard work and vision. She had lived a life full of love and meaning, and while her body was growing weaker, her spirit was at peace. Thank you, she said to Franklin, squeezing his hand. For what? He asked. For opening your door that night, for saving my life, for giving me this beautiful, wonderful life. Franklin brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Thank you for staying. For choosing me and this life when you could have had anything. You made me happier than I ever thought possible. They sat together as the fire burned low and the snow fell outside. Two souls who had found each other in the midst of a blizzard and had built a life that would endure long after they were gone. In the years that followed, Eleanor's health had its ups and downs, but she remained a vital presence on the ranch, her wisdom and kindness touching everyone around her. She taught her granddaughters to sew and cook, shared her love of reading with all the children, and continued to manage the ranch accounts with her characteristic precision. Franklin remained devoted to her, his love deepening with each passing year. He would bring her flowers from her garden, read to her in the evenings when her eyes grew tired, and hold her hand through the long winter nights. Their love was a steady flame, warming everyone who came near it. In 1915, Eleanor and Franklin celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends from town and neighboring ranches. As Eleanor looked around at the people who had filled her life with joy, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Thomas raised a toast. To my parents, who showed me what real love looks like. To my mother, who left everything she knew to build a life here. To my father, who opened his door to a stranger in a blizzard and found his future. May we all be so fortunate. Everyone raised their glasses, and Eleanor caught Franklin's eye across the room. He winked at her, and she smiled, remembering the shy young ranch hand who had saved her life all those years ago. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Eleanor and Franklin found themselves alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Franklin's arm was around Eleanor's shoulders, and her head rested on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I would do it all again, Franklin said suddenly. Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of fear, I would do it all again for this life with you. So would I, Eleanor agreed. 1,000 times over I would choose you. They remained there as darkness fell and the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting and true. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had worked and loved and passed on to their children. Inside the house, the lamps glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of home and family. Life continued in its rhythm of seasons and years. Eleanor watched her grandchildren grow into young adults, saw great-grandchildren arrive to fill the ranch with new laughter and joy. She saw Alice's medical practice flourish, Henry's architectural firm succeed, Thomas guide the ranch into the modern age while still maintaining its heart and soul. In 1920, Eleanor and Franklin celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their children. Eleanor was 75 now, her dark hair completely gray, her movements slow but still graceful. Franklin was 70, his face deeply lined but his eyes still bright with intelligence and humor. After the small party, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she looked at herself in the mirror and saw not an old woman but the sum of all her years, every joy and sorrow, every choice and consequence written on her face. Franklin came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "Still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said. Eleanor laughed. "You need spectacles, old man." "My eyes work just fine," Franklin insisted. "I see the woman who was brave enough to travel across the country alone. The woman who chose to stay with a poor cowboy instead of seeking an easier life. The woman who gave me 3 incredible children and loved me through every day of 42 years. That woman is beautiful beyond measure." Eleanor turned to embrace him, and they stood there in their bedroom, the same room where their children had been born, where they had comforted each other through griefs and celebrated joys, where they had loved each other through decades of marriage. The years passed, gentle in their rhythm. Eleanor and Franklin grew older together, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They spent their days in quiet contentment, watching the ranch continue under Thomas's capable management, delighting in visits from their ever-growing family. In the spring of 1925, Eleanor woke one morning feeling different, lighter somehow, as if some burden she had not known she was carrying had been lifted. She rose and dressed carefully, then made her way to the kitchen where Franklin was preparing breakfast, as he had done every morning for years as her strength waned. They ate together in companionable silence, then walked out to the porch to watch the sunrise. The mountains were magnificent in the early light, and the air smelled of new grass and possibility. "It has been a good life," Eleanor said softly. Franklin looked at her sharply, hearing something in her tone. "It is not over yet." Eleanor smiled and took his hand. "I know. But I wanted to say it anyway. It has been a good life, Franklin, the best life. I want you to know that." "I do know it," Franklin said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it because you told me every day with your words and your actions. You made it a good life, Eleanor. You made everything better just by being in it." They sat together as the sun rose higher, painting the world in gold, and Eleanor felt at peace. She had lived a full life, a life rich with love and meaning. She had been loved deeply and had loved in return. She had raised children and seen them thrive. She had built a home and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. That afternoon, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Eleanor closed her eyes for a nap in her favorite chair by the window and quietly slipped away. Franklin was holding her hand, and the last thing she felt was his thumb gently rubbing circles on her palm, as he had done for nearly 50 years. Franklin grieved deeply but quietly, as was his nature. He continued living in the house they had shared, surrounded by memories of Eleanor. He told stories about her to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, keeping her memory alive and vibrant. He tended her garden with meticulous care, making sure her favorite flowers bloomed each spring. In the evenings, he would sit in his chair by the fireplace, The chair where Eleanor had sat in a borrowed quilt all those years ago after he pulled her from the blizzard. And he would remember. He remembered her smile, her laugh, the way she would wrinkle her nose when she was thinking hard about something. He remembered the feel of her hand in his, the sound of her voice, the way she made everything in life better. Franklin lived for 3 more years, continuing to be a vital part of the ranch and his family's lives. He played with his great-grandchildren, taught them about cattle and horses and the land. He shared his wisdom with Thomas and the other younger ranchers, helping them navigate the changing times. On a cold November night in 1928, 51 years after the blizzard that had changed his life forever, Franklin passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was buried next to Eleanor on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. But their true legacy was not carved in stone. It lived in the ranch that continued to thrive under their descendants' care. It lived in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their values of hard work, integrity, and deep love. It lived in the stories that were told and retold, of the blizzard and the cowboy and the stranger who found each other and built a life together. Thomas ran the ranch for many more years before passing it to his own son. Catherine became a beloved matriarch, known for her kindness and wisdom. Alice's medical practice served the community for decades. Henry's architectural firm designed many of the important buildings in Denver, including a library he dedicated to his mother's memory. The ranch itself grew and changed with the times, adapting to new technologies and methods while maintaining the core values Franklin and Eleanor had instilled. It remained in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that began with a blizzard and a stranger stumbling to a cabin door. Years turned into decades, decades into a century. The small cabin where Eleanor and Franklin had first sheltered from the storm was preserved as a historical landmark, restored and maintained by their descendants. Visitors would come to see it and hear the story of the cowboy and the stranger, the blizzard that brought them together, and the love that sustained them through a lifetime. On the wall of the cabin hung a framed photograph, taken on Eleanor and Franklin's 40th anniversary. They sat together on their porch, Franklin's arm around Eleanor's shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera with eyes that sparkled with love and contentment. Beneath the photograph was a small plaque with Eleanor's words, "We found each other," and indeed they had. Two people who should never have met, brought together by chance and a snowstorm, who chose each other every day for the rest of their lives. Their love story became legend in the valley, a reminder that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, that kindness and courage can change everything, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm. The ranch continued to thrive into the 21st century, a testament to the foundation Eleanor and Franklin had built. Their story was told to each new generation, ensuring that the values they embodied would never be forgotten. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and fast, the family would gather around the fire and remember the blizzard of 1877, when winter made travel impossible for months, and a cowboy and a stranger became inseparable by spring, starting a legacy that would endure forever.